insurance policy to be issued only when the holder possesses a Zimbabwe broadcaster's service vehicle radio license, forces people to financially support and the state-run broadcaster, even when they may not necessarily listen to the SABC channels or even agree with some of the editorial content. This infringes on the right to information and the principles of fair access to information on the information market. The ZHRC also continues to be concerned about the Private Voluntary Organizations Act, which poses restrictions on civil liberties. Our progress, ladies and gentlemen, in terms of human rights promotion and protection as a country must be anchored in deeper alignment with global human rights standards. It is imperative that Zimbabwe moves towards ratifying key outstanding international instruments. That includes the United Nations Convention Against Torture and Other Cruel, Inhuman and Degrading Treatment, that is called UNCAT, and its optional protocol, which would allow the creation of preventive mechanisms and to legislate a specific anti-torture act. Ladies and gentlemen, Zimbabwe remains now one of the only two African countries that have not ratified the United Nations Convention Against Torture. And yet, our constitution prohibits torture. And Zimbabwe must therefore move with speed in order to remove this dubious distinction of being one of the two that do not ratify it. And it would better protect Zimbabweans by allowing them greater protection, and it would allow the setting up of a special mechanism on the prevention of torture that other countries have, so that we indeed systemically deal with the prevention of torture. The other outstanding unratified treaties are the United Nations Convention on all persons, on protection of persons from enforced disappearances, and the United Nations Convention on the reduction of statelessness. These are the only three major instruments that Zimbabwe needs to ratify. And ladies and gentlemen, the Zimbabwe Human Rights Commission is of the belief and the conviction that the Zimbabwe government can indeed do this, and we employ it upon to do so. Exactly 21 days after last year's International Human Rights Day, the government of Zimbabwe celebrated and indeed gave Zimbabweans a present of International Human Rights Day by abolishing the death penalty almost this time last year, which is a phenomenal achievement. For this year, the Zimbabwe Human Rights Commission urges the government to crown the celebrations of International Human Rights Day by doing the easier task of saving Zimbabwe from being one of the only two African countries that have not ratified CAT, and in fact being in danger of being the last ones, because if the other one ratifies it, Zimbabwe would be the only country in Africa that has not ratified the Convention Against Torture. As such, the Zimbabwe Human Rights Commission asks the government to urgently move with speed and rectify this anomaly. That is out of keeping with the government's otherwise clear commitment to the protection of human rights. That is that we even saw the abolition of the death penalty by when it is difficult in other countries to abolish, but Zimbabwe was able to do it, and we have no doubt that it can ratify the United Nations Against Torture, so that we are not the only country in Africa that will remain, because there is that risk. As we look ahead, we must ensure that legislative reforms continue in a manner that aligns with our constitution and treaty obligations. In this regard, we